Greetings. My name is Andries Sitwe from the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies, and welcome to our Thursday afternoon webinar, where we investigate and talk about the challenges and the difficulties facing those struggling to survive at the margin of capitalism in Southern Africa in the time of the pandemic and beyond. Yesterday, we celebrated Youth Day. It's a day in which we commemorate the courage and the defiance of the young people who rose up most prominently on 6 June 1970s, but in many other times in South African history to fight for a better future, fight against racism and the brutality of exploitation. Today, unfortunately, many people aren't facing that, are not experiencing that brighter future. Instead, many people are experiencing unemployment, social and political marginalization, even hunger and starvation. That promise that people fought for looks sometimes on the verge of disappearing. And for this reason, when government announced the rollout of a social relief of distress grant during the early months of the pandemic last year, many people saw it as a very hopeful sign. It seemed that government was at last prepared to acknowledge the reality of deep structural unemployment in our society, and they might be getting ready to roll out a basic income grant that would make life, at least, it would not be a silver bullet, but it would be an investment in keeping people alive, keeping people hoping, allowing them to fight another day, and maybe making that brighter future come true after all. But earlier this year, on 30 April, government unfortunately announced the termination of that grant. And we are here today. We have got three powerful speakers. Wanga Mzembe Mkabile of the Medical Research Council, Huda Abrams-Faker of the Black Sash, and Julie Eccles of the Pay the Grants Coalition to talk to us about the implications of this surprising and unfortunate move. What are we to learn about the policy process? What lessons can we learn from the termination? What are its likely implications? And what should people concerned about this, and what should civil society do going forward? So thank you very much for joining us. I'm looking forward to a really interesting hour. Listeners, please let us know you're here, and please share your questions and your comments on the chat line on your YouTube channel or your Facebook channel. We will give our three speakers 10 minutes each. We will talk for about half an hour, and then we will go to questions and answers. So I'm going to begin, Wanga, with you. As a researcher looking at the impact of the social grant, looking at the reality of malnutrition and hunger among many people, can you talk to us just firstly about the impact that we saw from the top-ups of the grants and also of the social relief of distress grants? Was it well targeted? Did it make a difference? And what are the implications of the grant being terminated?
Thank you, Andres. So I think certainly from the research that we've done, and specifically here I speak about a Black Sash-led study that we conducted last year in rural and urban communities across South Africa, where we sought to understand both the implementation process of the SRD grant and the impact. And then also smaller studies that I've been involved in since, from last year until now, that have also tried to look at the impact of the social grants increases and then the SRD specifically. I think what's come through very powerfully is that the SRD grant in particular, because it was the first time that such a grant was being introduced in South Africa, had a huge impact, and the impact was on several levels, not just like sort of at the material level, but even psychologically, just the psyche of unemployed people, many of whom had been unemployed for many, many years. It represented the hope you referred to, Andres, for many people. And certainly participants have told us about how it made them feel seen, visible for the first time to the state. They felt seen and recognized by the state. And importantly, one participant in the Eastern Cape talked about how she was very surprised to hear the announcement on radio that the SRD grant would be implemented. And the pleasant surprise for her was that she felt that for the first time in this country, having been unemployed for many years, that the government was recognizing that her state of unemployment and poverty was not her fault. So I think that's come through quite a lot, just what it represented for people. And then at a material level, of course, it's a small grant, at 350 Rand in particular, the SRD grant, but the symbolic nature of it, of the state doing something to intervene and ensuring that people have some sort of income, was important. And also people were able to use it to meet immediate and very basic needs around food, around transport. In the Black Search study, we just saw how much the burden of accessing and paying for services in South Africa, how much worse it is for the poor. So a lot of it went towards paying for electricity, for services. And in households where there was more than one recipient, people were able to pull it, to pull the grant with other grants, sometimes on their own. And so it was able to go further. And just the psychological reassurance of having a predictable source of income that people could rely on, that where they knew that it's a small amount and it does run out, but just knowing that at the end of the long month of struggle, there's this at the end of this long tunnel of a month, of a typical month in South Africa for unemployed people, that there's this grant waiting, made a huge impact. And so what struck me in particular, both with the Black Search study and the other smaller studies that I've been involved with at the MRC, was how people have often talked about it in terms of saying that when asked to contrast the pre-COVID era and COVID, and finding themselves in COVID, and whether that had worsened their situation, a number of participants said, well, the period between when of the immediate lockdown, those few months before the social relief package was effected, actually was no different for them than pre-COVID. Such was the precarious lives they lived, such was the hardship they had before COVID, that immediate period before the social relief package was announced was just as hard. Except what made it harder was that they couldn't turn to their usual sources of help, their networks, their neighbors who would help, because everyone was in a similar situation. And therefore, when the social relief package was announced and then implemented in the form of the COVID-19 SRD grant, in the form of the top-ups and the caregivers grant, it made a difference. And for some, it was the first time that they were having a source of income. So we've had, especially SRD participants, who said that because of this grant, they experienced COVID, therefore, last year as a better year compared to the other years, because the difference was that for the first time, they had some sort of income. And I found that to be a very powerful demonstration of, first of all, of how much this grant had been needed before COVID, and therefore why it should continue. It should continue, not only because we are still in COVID, but even beyond COVID, because people needed it even before. And then lastly, I think, a young man I interviewed in February, when the grant had just ended, the second extension, and he said, I actually went back to SASSA when I saw that the money didn't come in. I went to check, and I said, well, did you not know that it was going to end, that the announcement was you made that it would end in January? And he was sheepish in his reply. He says, well, I knew, but I didn't want to believe it. And I also hoped that since it was extended last year in October, it was supposed to end, but then it was extended, that maybe it would be extended again. And to me, that just also was a demonstration of how desperate people were for this money. And I wasn't there, of course, when the announcement was made about extending it to April, but I'm sure he must have been so relieved to hear that. And so to have it taken away now again, I just know that the impact of that is devastating for many people, households in South Africa. that for the first time felt recognized by the state. Thanks.
Thank you, Wanga. There's clearly much more we can say, and there's clearly much we can say just about the material impact of those that they had. But what I'd like to draw attention to is the policy process around it, and the process of engagement with the state. There was such a strong call for the grant to be issued in the first place, such a clamor of voices asking for it to be extended, for it not to be terminated. Huda, you've been part of the Black Sashes campaigns around this issue for years. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe also the backstory of the campaign for a basic income grant, but also for the specific contestations around the termination or not of the social relief of distress grant?
Sure. Yes, thank you, Andries. I mean, look, this was definitely a key intervention for government to respond. And especially in the context of Youth Day, when we mark the 45th anniversary of the uprising, the key question has been, what strides have we made in ensuring our youth have better opportunities for employment in South Africa? So when you're looking at the fact that there haven't been much strides in employment, the provision of a grant for the unemployed is definitely a key strategy, given the fact that our social assistance framework provides targeted assistance for means-tested applications only to children, the elderly, and the disabled. So there's a glaring gap by providing for those who are unemployed. And quite ironically, just a couple of months before the pandemic hit South Africa, the United Nations Committee on Socioeconomic and Cultural Rights, they acknowledged that the social grant system in South Africa is an important instrument that reduces poverty, but noted and was concerned that the poverty ratio in the country is at an acceptably high rate. So given that, they actually made a recommendation to government that they must look at the way of providing income for those between age 18 and 59 years. So this was definitely an intervention. And the reason why it is so significant, because Black Sash has been at the forefront of providing a basic income grant for more than 20 years. The fact that there was always an issue of unemployment when we entered our democracy, when poverty, unemployment, and inequality was a challenge, the solution of providing a basic income grant was seen and tabled by government. However, despite a committee doing a report synonymous with the basic income grant, you always make reference to the Taylor Committee. And they found that the solution to uplift people and to revive the economy would be through a basic income grant. And because of looking at whether this would be affordable or not, the Taylor Committee recommended that it should be phased in by starting off by providing social assistance to the unemployed. So this was definitely something that we welcomed, cautiously though, because we did have challenges. The fact that the value was very little, the fact that the eligibility criteria was definitely a challenge in the sense that you were not on you never had to be on a database. So in other words, SASSA beneficiaries couldn't apply for the grant. And this was a gendered discrimination, because if you were receiving a grant on behalf of your children, you couldn't qualify for this grant. Although you may have been an unemployed woman, you couldn't apply because you get picked up on the SASSA database. There was also many challenges with the administrative online process. And so there's still challenges today. So despite the fact that we did have issues with the grant, we did welcome it. And so we engaged immediately with government regarding this. We then found that it was important to highlight what the challenges are, that we wanted an increase in the value, that the criteria for more to be eligible for the grant. And so and also for the duration to be extended, because we knew that the impact of the pandemic would be felt for a long time to come. So we had direct engagement with government. Regrettably, we received no response. We launched a petition through amandla.mobi asking for basic income support and listing that we want the amount to be increased, the eligibility criteria to make it permanent. And then also there was an endorsement by community. So the civil society came together to identify that this was an issue that is cross-cutting and that will assist the community as a whole to bring together the fact that if they have money in their pocket, they will be able to survive, and also use that money to try and get a little bit more income. And it was a coordinated approach by civil society. So the inroads that we did make was that although the grant wasn't increased, there were 2 extensions. So it was supposed to end at the end of October, and then it was extended until January, and then again until April. So there were definitely inroads, and through DSD and also government, they engage with the fact that this needs to be looked at as a long-term solution. To address the challenges in the country. And so you had a discussion paper launched by the Department of Social Development. Our ruling party also engaged with it, and also the National Planning Commission engaged and looked at how this COVID SRD grant could be restructured to make it permanent. But although we delivered an open letter to the Department of Social Development as well as SASSA, our partner amandla.mobi also delivered a petition where they, in a matter of weeks, were able to get more than 60,000 signatures, which they then delivered, hand-delivered to National Treasury to illustrate the support we have for the extension of the grant. Unfortunately, the grant wasn't extended post-May, post-April, and there was really a coming together and a mobilization on the ground through our Pay the Grants campaign. We were able to create awareness on a national platform in provinces to take up this issue, and despite all these efforts, unfortunately, there was no sort of reciprocation or response, a positive response by government. They did acknowledge, and the acting DG of Social Development accepted the open letter and indicated that it would be important to have a meeting with civil society. Unfortunately, despite follow-ups, that hasn't happened to date. We even, because of the gendered slant of the COVID SRD grant and the fact that ended, there was a caregiver grant, which recipients of the child support grant were entitled to, that ended in October. And so Black Sash took a legal challenge to address that issue. But because of the urgency issues and the procedural elements that you need to comply with on a procedural basis, we were not successful. But that doesn't mean that it didn't get the attention from government, and we believe that by making those inroads through legal challenges, engaging with government, and through a collective call by civil society, that resulted in the 2 extensions. But Black Sash, and as well, I'm sure, as other organizations, this is just, we may have lost the battle not to have the grant extended, but we need to push for the grant to be reinstated. The fact that there is a DSD discussion paper on the table is promising. And now the pressure is for DSD to implement time frames and an implementation plan to make sure that it gets done urgently. Black Sash, as well as other organizations, have made submissions on this discussion paper, and reports from DSD is that it will be presented to Cabinet. So we await further feedback on that. There is also the National Planning Commission has said that it may be important to retain the existing special COVID SRD grant and use this as basis for providing a basic income grant in the immediate and medium term. So there's definitely elements of movement. The challenge is that it may not be moving as fast as we want. And that is where it is important for us to come together as civil society and put pressure on government. It is important to note that government works in silos, because even though the Department of Social Development has asked for an extension, and there was a synergy in terms of what the ask was from civil society as well as the Department of Social Development, a National Treasury did not accept the extension by Social Development to extend the grant. So it's important to also have a strong media strategy so that there is a momentum kept of asking for the score, and government to be continually pressured to look at it. NEDLAC as well has investigated the feasibility of the basic income grant. So we know that it is being looked at. But the question is, how fast and is there really political will to implement it as a measure to address the challenges, complemented obviously by looking at job creation and employment. So we have engaged with government. We haven't been successful to a certain extent, but it's important to push and see how we can change the mindsets, because it's important that when you look at economic recovery, it's not only from the perspective of the financially and economically, but from a human rights perspective and invest in human capital, because as you can just from the stories that Wanga has emphasized, that level of dignity will then encourage people to become part of the local economy, and in that way we will then strengthen the economy. I mean, the legal challenge, government hasn't responded to date, and the question of whether we need a legal challenge to hold the state to account in terms of its obligations. I mean, there's a constitutional obligation that government must support those who cannot support themselves. And we just need to be cautious and think it through, because there is the separation of powers and the question of whether the judiciary will intervene in dictating how the government must spend its money. We must also consider, in terms of when we look at the progressive realization of this right, what steps has government put in place and whether it's reasonable, and can we force government to make it an imperative. So those are all challenges that we need to look at and solutions to it. But at the end of the day, there is a crisis and government needs to respond to its obligation. And so I think there's a bottoms-up approach in terms of mobilization on the ground, but also a multi-pronged strategy in terms of engaging with policy, creating awareness so that we speak with one voice. And so the bottom line is we must keep the pressure.
Thank you, Huda, for that overview of a very complex policy engagement process. It's so clear that so much of this is about the rands and cents are important, but such important, crucial issues relating to what does it mean to be a citizen, and what is the relationship between citizens and the state that purports to want to care for them, and what is the nature of the policy dialogue. And I'm particularly interested in your final remarks. So the question is, what now? What are the next steps? What can people in civil society, what should policymakers do? Is it enough simply to protest the termination? What are the proactive steps that can be made to move this debate on and to get it unstuck? Julie from the Pay the Grants Coalition, do you want to give us your views?
Thank you so much, Andries, and thank you so much, Wanga and Huda, for the insights. So I'm representing Pay the Grants today. Pay the Grants, yes, you can call it a coalition. It's currently a campaign, but it's rapidly turning into a very big campaign, and it's growing very quickly. It started under lockdown and under COVID when the SRD grant was introduced. And so we realized two things, that first of all, there were problems with the implementation of the SRD grant, but also that there was this positive side to the fact that the government had introduced millions of people into the social security system for the first time ever since our democracy. As was alluded to earlier, people who face unemployment. And since then, we have put pressure on government. We have been part of, groups putting pressure, and that has resulted in the SRD grant, for instance, being extended. But yes, it was terminated, and that was a real shock to the system. Even though we are still in the middle of a crisis, in the middle of a pandemic, even though there are still millions of people unemployed, even though unemployment is worse than it's ever been. And so we have to ask ourselves, if we're still in the middle of this crisis, and as employment is structural, it's embedded in the fabric of our society, we urgently need to bring back this grant. And so we have asked as our campaign for the grant to be extended, but also increased to $585 a month, which is the absolute bare minimum, what is known as the food poverty line. It's still not enough, we all know that, but we are calling for an increase, and we're calling for it to be expanded to include those caregivers. So the caregiver top-up was scrapped in October, a huge shock for women, for caregivers everywhere. So not only should the government extend the grant, it should include caregivers in that 585. So that is where our campaign is. We started out in conjunction with many groups, writing letters, having talks, especially with Black Sash, having press conferences. But now we're at a point where the campaign has really grown to the whole country, and we have community leaders, activists, mobilizers getting on board. And we really welcome participation, because this big that we are asking for, which we'll get to in a second, is really for everyone. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is for everyone in the country to do better and to have a better life and have better quality of life. So maybe this is a good chance to segue into what we mean by a BIG. So a BIG stands for a basic income guarantee. Some people say grant. We like to say guarantee because the word grant has this connotation of that you're giving someone a gift, or that they should, that there's some who are deserving and some who are not deserving. A guarantee implies that you as a person in South Africa, as a human right, you have a right to an income, you have a right to dignity, you have a right to be able to make ends meet. And it is, unfortunately, we're in a situation where as a country we think it's okay for some people to be starving or for their children to be hungry. It's not okay. So that is what the basic income guarantee is all about. And we're on the precipice of the 4th Industrial Revolution. And as we know, innovation generally, we hear people say that it's supposed to create jobs, but we know that innovation generally destroys jobs. And so not only are we at a place where structural unemployment is possibly worse than ever, we're now at a point where we have to consider, is work really the future of the world? And since we are part of a global economy, we have to look at what countries around the world are doing to address this question of structural unemployment, and especially as it's going to get worse and worse as the world changes and as the 4th Industrial Revolution comes along. And we have to also ask ourselves another question. Is life only about work? Is it only about survival? Or is it also about the human potential of each and every person? And some people are talented artists. Some people are caregivers. They love to be caregivers. Some people are, and these are sometimes unpaid or uncompensated professions, but they're worthwhile and they contribute to society. So we have to ask ourselves, what about free time? What about leisure time? What about studying further? What about furthering oneself as a person? Or what about just, simply enjoying life, having the space to breathe? We should be striving for that. So this is all where it starts. It starts at looking at our systems and seeing the SRD grant as a window into a big. And from there, whether it's a phased-in approach or however it takes place, we gradually increase that amount. Not so gradually, but we increase it to a point where everyone can live. And this is all, we can get to the affordability question as well, but this is all very affordable and very realistic. It's just that we're not used to this way of thinking. So a lot of us are not used to this idea of what we think of as free money. So yes, that's what the Pay the Grants campaign is about. And we really invite people to join this campaign, to be part of it, so that we can make it a national movement, especially for young people, to be part of this and to have a future that is bright and filled with opportunity and worthwhile for everyone in the country.
Thank you. So many questions come up in relation to what you've talked about. One of our viewers has already put a question on the chat, in a way asking about, in a way, who are the interlocutors? Who should the policy dialogue be with? Israel Nkune asks, will you please engage with the Minister of Social Development, also the President, to request a meeting and discuss this live? Is this possible? That's a call for transparent people's democracy. I would really very much like to see the President live on television or on a webinar asking questions instead of just telling us what's going to happen to us. But in a way, the question is, how should the dialogue be? In a way, what you've said, Julie, is that the arguments are so clear and so strong for doing this thing, and at the same time there seems to be a kind of ideological stuckness. There's clearly things to be said on both sides. People are concerned about fiscal space, etc. But how do we move on, and how do we convene the discussions that are necessary to move the debate on to the next step and to make this thing a reality? Do any of you have a... Julie, I'm going to start with you, and I'd like to hear Huda's and Wanga's point of view as well.
Well, it's come up over and over again, not just during COVID, but in the history of the country, this question of a beg. And our government has a mindset of austerity, has a mindset of neoliberalism and this seeps into many different, aspects of society where people believe that you need to work in order to deserve to have a life of dignity. And this really we can trace back all the way to colonialism, to the theft of land and the forced indentured servitude of Black and Indigenous people. But in order for us to move this issue forward, we really have to challenge Treasury as well, and we have to challenge the presidency as well. So DSD is open to the conversation, but every time DSD comes back and says, we can't do it, we can't extend the grant, we can't look at the big, because Treasury has given us a limited budget in terms of social spending. And the reason is because we need to balance the books. And we can't be having conversations about balancing books when people are desperate, when people are really, really in trouble. So we have to put pressure on Treasury as well to challenge this debunked myth that austerity is something good for the country, or that austerity helps the economy. We know that we need a massive stimulus to recover from what's been going on. So I would put pressure on the presidency and Treasury first and foremost, as well as the Department of Social Development. Yeah.
Thank you, Julie, for that. And I'm actually going to just throw up another question, a comment that came from our viewers. in a way addressing this notion that social grants inevitably simply create a culture of dependency. Whereas one of the things that's interesting about the proposal income grant from the beginning is that it can be a way, firstly, of pushing up aggregate demand in the lower income deciles, creating demand in the bottom of the economy, stimulating the economy. But it can also be seed capital that help people start their business. It can help create the security people need in order to go look for work, etc., etc. So I'm very interested in how the demand for a basic income guarantee links into a broader vision for a more inclusive economy and for people to be socially and economically empowered. So I'd like to know from each of you, starting with you again, Julie, just how you see how do we push the debate around the grant beyond this notion that it's a demand simply for a handout?
Thanks, Andries. I'm so glad this question has come up. I'm gonna give a metaphor. This is not my metaphor, but I think it's brilliant. I'm gonna share it with you. Money is like poo. If you pile it up, it stinks. If you spread it around, it makes things grow. And I think that's a nice metaphor since we're speaking with Plas today. But basically, we need to put money into the economy from the bottom. We cannot simply be helping all the businesses at the top and hope that it trickles down, because we know that doesn't happen. So really, this is a question of helping the economy. But about the question of dependency, we are all dependent on the system, and this system is designed in a very, very particular way. And what we need is for ordinary people to take control of the system and say, this is a democracy, this economy belongs to all of us. So we already dependent on the system, we just don't know it. And so when you give people, and studies also show, when you give people a guaranteed income, work seeking activity increases. Small businesses, that kind of activity increases. There's an increase in child nutrition. There's an increase in children attending school. So this is not about, I'm giving you a handout and you're going to waste it. That's a nonsensical way to think about it. But it is a pattern that we've fallen into that we need to break.
Thank you. Wanga, can you just talk about the extent to which you saw those knock-on effects and spin-offs of the grant impacting in your research?
Yes, I was actually I was going to say, comment on exactly that. I mean, I think, first of all, it was a very tiny amount, 350 Rand. So I think research participants weren't unclear about that, about how small it was. But again, to demonstrate that it's not laziness, it's not people not wanting to work or wanting to live in poverty and without income that has kept people unemployed. It is because there's simply no opportunities yet. And when they're able to get something as small as this 350 Rand, there is an attempt to stretch it further, to use it to get out of poverty, not just merely survive in it. And I think I had a participant in Masiphumelele who, with the COVID-19 grant, started the 350 Rand. She used it to start a food stall business, not a stall, a food selling food on the street, pens, or you call it tripe or offal, with steamed bread, ujekwe. And so she brings a whole pot of this steaming tripe with the jekwe already made, or the steamed bread, and then she would sell it, targeting taxi drivers, early morning commuters. And she was talking about what a huge difference that made. But because she had just started that and the grant ended, so she hadn't yet accumulated enough or established that business well enough to be able to survive on it now without the grant. So she was just talking about what a devastation it was that it's ended, because she doesn't know now that that she will be able to continue just relying only on selling. She won't be able to grow and expand the business. She won't be able to go from one pot of tribe to 2 to 3 and so on. So definitely people have tried to engage in activities that would increase it. Having said that, I think I like what Julie said early in her comments, which was that we need to see the basic income guarantee, another term I really like, the guarantee part. We need to see it as a social right of citizenship. So so I think it becomes a very tricky balance where we have to demonstrate that it's both a right, but it will also help. Yes, it will help people because people naturally want to be independent. People naturally want to improve their lives. People naturally want to be productive unless they are ill, you know. But whether and what people use the grant on shouldn't be determining whether we give it or not. It's a right.
Thank you, Wanga. Your comments make it so clear how the demand and the call for this grant is really a demand for citizenship to become really fully integrated into their society and to fully participate in it. Huda, from your vantage point in the Black Sash, where the grants are one of the things you look at, but how do you see this kind of nexus of demands impacting on, and what is your vision for what needs to be put in place to create an end to precarity, an end to hunger, and more social and economic empowerment in the lives of unemployed and marginalized people?
Now, look, I think the vulnerability of 18 to 59 years is that they are unemployed not because they want to be, they are able-bodied and want to work, but they can't find work. So the question is, what is government's responsibility? And that's why the perception should be from a rights-based point of view. So the question of dependency should not come up. People want to work, and while there is a recovery program where there will be job creation, although that has been on the table for very long and hasn't happened, and so in this context, it's still going to take very long to happen. What must be the complementing mechanism, and that should be social assistance, because there's an obligation in terms of its constitutional imperative, as well as there is an international obligation on the part of government. So when you're looking at the issue of social assistance, it is for people to live with dignity. And so when you're looking at the income that comes in, and although it is a little money, people have found it in innovative ways to increase it and to survive, but at the same time, it's contributing to the household. But that hasn't been enough. There must be an amount at least to the food poverty line of 585 Rand. So it's complementary. I mean, the social protection program in itself, social assistance is one of that. And to be really effective, it must be at an amount where people can live with dignity. And that's not going to happen overnight. But there is an urgency to provide some lifeline now, which government is failing to respond to. And that's why there is a significant role on the part of civil society to put pressure on government.
Thank you, Huda. I mean, your point about urgency is so resonant. On the one hand, we have this powerful clarity about a demand that just seems to make sense. But what can be done? Is it simply a matter that we need to appeal to the holders of power in the kind of closed boardrooms where policy is made? Is it just a matter of writing more and more research reports, signing more and more petitions? What are the things that people can do? You're making such a clear case that something needs to happen. Something needs to happen to shift this presently stuck debate. How can we and our viewers get involved in helping to support this campaign that's so obviously necessary? I'm going to start with you again, Julie.
Thanks, Andries. We really encourage anyone and everyone who wants to be part of Pay the Grants to join us. And what we can do is just share our email address in the comments. We are also looking at popular education and engagement in the form of workshops. So we've done 1 or 2 workshops with Equal Education and with COSAS to speak to young people and get their thoughts about the pig, just to introduce the concept and to have debate and discussion and answer some frequently asked questions. But really, anyone who is interested in mobilizing in their own area, in mobilizing at their school or university, should join us and come on board, because this is for everyone. This is something which can really change the course of history of our country, and can really change lives for the better. So what we can say is, please, if you're on Facebook, join our group. It's called Pay the Grants. If you're on Twitter, follow us on Pay the Grants, and please reach out to us on paythegrants@gmail.com. So there's many ways to get hold of us, and we would love for people to join and make this a movement.
Thank you, Julie. Huda, your view on
Yeah, it's not an easy one. I mean, we've done so much, and still government has not responded positively. So there's definitely a multi-pronged strategy. The one is through mobilization, letting the voices be heard from the ground, sharing the lived realities on the ground to get through to government. It's engaging in the policy processes with the discussion paper, with the National Planning Commission, etc., and continuously ask for a face-to-face meeting with the presidency, with National Treasury, with the Minister of Finance, which we have been doing, but has not received a positive response. So we need to push that envelope more and more. The like I pointed out, a legal challenge is something that must be considered, but there are pros and cons to that. So, it's about knowing what you want, taking the time to formulate that strategy so that it incrementally can work for government to comply with its obligations and hold them accountable. So there's no one right answer. I think there's going to be pressure points from government in all ways and at different levels, so that all government departments speak with one voice and hear our message in terms of providing income for the unemployed.
Thank you. There's a very interesting question that comes to us via Twitter. Let me see if I can get it on the screen, by Lawrence, who proposes that we should resume the 350 Rand grants and we should push for trials of a basic income guarantee in a couple of regions. Anyway, this raises the question about the kinds of evidence that are necessary. Do you think the notion of trialing, it has been done in parts of the world, trialing a basic income guarantee is a viable one for South Africa, or do we have to find other ways of making the case? Wanga, I'm going to go to you as well.
I mean, I think in deciding to do that, in deciding which, whether to go for RCTs or not, we would have to ask the question: is part of the resistance due to lack of evidence? Is it that there isn't enough evidence? That would be the first question, and I would argue that it's not because there isn't an acknowledgement that this is needed. And then secondly, I think the other point to consider there is, if it's at 350 Rand, if that would be the trial, what would we be hoping to show? What level of impact would we be hoping to show? So I think certainly the kind of research that I'm engaged in, that Black Sash, that many others are engaged in, it's very important, and we need to build evidence-based campaigns. But I think research trials, which take several years, which require enormous resources, if they were to happen, they would have to happen right alongside the implementation of we want the big now. We don't want it in 5 years' time after a trial shows that it works. And we've seen this in Mexico with the Oportunidades program, another child grant program that was implemented. So they did implement it as a natural experiment, where it was given in certain areas and not others, and then evidence was used to track and see what the impact was. So it didn't stop the program from being implemented. It didn't, the policymakers didn't say, let's first do research. So I think that's how I would approach it. I think we have enough evidence. We have enough evidence of the lived reality of being without a grant. We have enough evidence of what it is to have, even just in this short window, we've seen what it can do. And we should just get on with it at 585, not 350.
Thank you, Wanga. I mean, it does, the question of if the problem isn't the evidence, then what is? And Marisha Damos asked a very interesting question. Do the organizations endorsing the Pay the Grants campaign believe that the implementation of a guarantee is an actual reality or just an election promise that's never going to happen? We've seen several times in recent years, including around the issue of land, politicians indulge in what looks like political theater, getting people's hopes about the possibility of radical change and so on, when the need disappear, just retiring the issue again. Is there, it would be quite a cynical thing to do, but do you think there's a risk that this is really what's going on? Or do you think that there is a genuine possibility of shifting the debate here? Huda, what do you think?
I must confess that I'm a bit skeptical. There's a discussion paper on the table, but this is an urgent call. And so we know that issues around discussion papers, policy processes can take years. There's enough evidence that it works, that it's needed, just from the fact that the COVID SRD grant has provided a lifeline. So in terms of evidence and having to do trials, that wouldn't be necessary. There's also, as a result of the COVID SRD grant, there's now a database which will then challenge the question of administration, because that was one of the issues with the cost and the implications of having a database and having the unemployed on a database. So there's been definite positive steps that we could learn from it. So it's clearly where the government wants to do it, what they want to prioritize, and the need to shift mindset so that they have political will.
Thank you. Julie, what is your view on this question? You've got you're close to where the rubber hits the road in terms of campaigning. Do you think there's real wiggle room? Do you think there's just a cynical political ploy going on here?
So, Andries, I must say the overwhelming feeling, I think, on the ground is that people are incredibly cynical about government, and rightfully so, and are really, really tired of empty promises from political parties. So really, it has been even put to the Pay the Grants as a challenge. Do not include political parties and do not allow them to capture this call. And we've listened to that because no matter who gets in power or how the election pans out, we still have to put pressure on government. And people are right to say that. I think overwhelmingly people are aware that these things are they're used as political footballs. So and I saw there was also a question about a jobs guarantee earlier, which is another one of those promises from government.
Thank you, Julie. All of this really goes back to your opening remarks, Wanga, that I thought was so important, was about you call it psychological, but that's also kind of political implications of the rollout of that grant. People feeling seen, people feeling that they are in a way being recognized as citizens of this country. And it's what you're talking about here really illustrates the extent to which it is the content of citizenship that's at stake here. Are people simply workers? Are they simply consumers? Are they simply voters? Or is there something more involved in being a citizen, which means that you're recognized as a valued member of this national community? And it seems to me this is one of the issues that's at the heart of this issue. Can you talk a little bit more about how that was reflected in your research, Wanga? Because it seems to me a very resonant theme that emerged.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the most powerful themes, certainly. And we theorize about citizenship and what it means and all of these things. But once you're in the ground and you're talking to people and you see how they themselves understand what it means to and what it should mean to be a citizenship. They understand the rights that they are entitled to. The participant I talked about, who talked about how she felt recognized by the state. She felt that also that this was a recognition that her state of unemployment and poverty is not her fault. She also said that it was also a recognition of her entitlement to social assistance. So people are aware that they have rights, and that that poverty and unemployment makes them invisible, that it makes them unseen by government, and so it's not even about theorizing it. It's what is happening, and it's surprising, one about South Africa. And when I've presented my data, outside the country, they say, how is it possible that you don't have like major civil unrest, given what's happening, the inequality, the levels of unemployment? And it makes me wonder too, because people are aware of what they should be getting. And I think it's a very big lesson that the state should take note of, that people want to be seen, and that government extending social assistance to them is a way of achieving that. It's a way of recognizing them as human beings. It's a way of recognizing their inherent dignity. So if government continues to fail to recognize that, I think we'll be in serious trouble.
Thank you, Wanga. Those are very powerful words. And we are coming into the closing minutes of our webinar here. So I'm going to ask Huda and Julie as well, whether you've got any final words that you want to say in summary about this important issue. Huda, you first.
Sure. I think, the question of a basic income grant has been on the table for more than 20 years. And as civil society, we should not allow government to actually just let it hang. There needs to be progressive steps towards the implementation of basic income grant by introducing a phased-in approach for those that are unemployed. I also want to point out that when we're looking at a basic income grant, it's not only to South African citizens, but also to those living in South Africa, as was the COVID SRG grant, was also extended to asylum seekers, refugees, and special permit holders. So that's also an important inclusion that must be noted. And so I call upon people to sign the petition, to have our voices heard as a country, so that government can fulfill its obligations. Thank you.
Thank you, Huda. Julie, last words from you.
Thanks, Andries. So from my side, I would just want to say that the big is it's not a silver bullet for everything. It's one step in the right direction, but it should really be part of a system. And that's why I'm so glad that we're engaging together here today, because there really needs to be a policy system that includes a jobs guarantee for all those who want to work, that includes land reform, meaningful land reform, that includes certain changes in education. A lot of people find our education does not equip them for life. They want to learn how to run a business. So I'm excited about taking this conversation forward in terms of formulating policy frameworks that will accompany this big, so that it can be made a reality. So thank you so much for this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you, Julie, and thank you all of you, Huda and Wanga as well, for this really powerful hour. It's brought home to me more than ever before around just what it means to hold solidarity as a virtue in our country. This should not just be a word; it should be made real. And it's through the through, for example, the payment of a basic income guarantee, that we can make those the words in our constitution that South Africa belongs to all who live in it a reality. It's I almost want to quote the TV license slogan: "It's the right to do," and hopefully this discussion can also just inspire us to go on and continue this campaign and make the argument better and stronger. So that this thing can become a reality. So thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you, listeners, for being here. Thank you for all of your comments on the side. We couldn't really put all of them. Many interesting points also made. I specifically just want to flag this comment from Nkanyiso Gomede. Once the FUD is won, let's encourage dignified ways of having it paid to beneficiaries. In which the grant needs to pay needs to make the value of citizenship concrete. So it's a powerful hour. Thank you very much for your inputs, and we look forward to hosting you soon again at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.